Clive Dennis. You are head of currencies at Schroders. If you compare your job, you are also a fund manager, say 10 years ago with today, what is different?
Well, it's always difficult to make money at any moment in time. I guess the most interesting part of what's changed in the last 10 years has really been the much bigger influence of central banks, of government involved in markets. Clearly, since the crisis over the last 5 years, central banks have been very active in many markets, foreign exchange, bond markets. Intervention has become much more regular and obviously much larger than it would have been sort of 10 years ago. So that's kind of the biggest difference that we've had to try and deal with in our deliberations over the last few years.
And is it to be continued, these influences from the central banks and the politicians?
Yes, we don't see any chance that politicians or central bankers are prepared to step back from markets at this point in time. They have a huge interest, politically, to keep control of their assets as far as possible. Obviously, debt is still very large. In many economies, deleveraging has been very modest. And the best way they see of keeping debt under control is to keep rates at basically zero and to have the central banks buying bonds, or to come up with more and more schemes to buy bonds to keep asset prices under control. So we don't really see any scope that central banks are leaving that particular arena for some time to come.
Which is the biggest threat for 2014 for you?
The biggest threat, as we see it, probably comes from China. There are many issues, as always, around the global markets, but China sort of sits foremost to our minds about where the risks lie, mainly because it's just very difficult to work out exactly what's going on. Most of us know that there's been this huge investment boom which has gone into unproductive assets, and at some point it will become very apparent that many of these assets are worth much, much less than they're being marked in banks' books, for example. So that's a big risk. Clearly the markets are very focused on the risks around potential tapering in the US. What's going on in Europe is still a problem. So there are a number of big risks around. China is kind of the biggest unknown because it's that much more difficult to get a strong handle on exactly what's happening at any moment in time in the economy.